thinking of a master plan, because ain't nothing but sweat inside my hand. So I dig in my pocket, all my money spent, dig deeper, still come up with a lick.
Wow.
Follow the money, my friend.
I usually say, cheesy. Show me the money. Kind of like Tom Cruise.
Cheesy rap there. Yes. No, I don't know where I was going with that. I'm actually going to see them perform tonight, funny enough. So they're on my mind. And I Paid in Full, this is a song, Show Me the Money, Follow the Money. We're going to be talking about fraud today and how to detect it and beyond, I'm sure. And I know very little, thankfully, about fraud, either side of the coin on that front. But we're thrilled to have Allison Miller on joining us, who knows a bit, and we're gonna talk about that and other things probably connected to Black Hat this year and the work that she's doing at IANS. So Allison, Great to have you on the show.
Thank you. I'm so excited to be here.
Yeah, and this is funny because we're still probably going to call it Chats on the Road because we haven't got to Las Vegas yet, but there are people that are there because Black Hat is happening, and you're certainly there.
We're just driving in circles.
You can. Yeah, I think we're lost in the desert somewhere from point A to point B. But Allison, yes, she made it there, so maybe she can be for a few minutes our eyes and ears on the floor. But before we get there, we want to know who Allison is. So, little introduction about yourself for our audience.
Yeah. Hey, everyone. I'm Allison Miller. I am one of the IANS organization's newest faculty members. And part of what I'll be doing is helping sort of build out capabilities for any clients who have questions about fraud and anti-abuse, as well as the traditional questions and queries on cybersecurity. So my background, I've gone back and forth between enterprise cybersecurity, product security, anti-abuse, and fraud multiple times in my career. I've worked at places like Visa, PayPal, eBay, Skype, Electronic Arts, Google, Bank of America, and most recently Reddit. In many of those roles, I had a pure cyber role or a pure anti-fraud role. And in a few of those, I had a hybrid role where I was dealing with issues across both sides of the fence, if you will.
Yeah, and it's interesting. We were talking a little bit beforehand about the different roles, separate, together, hybrid, mixing, and in your journey. I mean, my view of this was fraud, financial services. That's where a lot of investment has been made to keep credit card fraud down and things like that. Maybe the healthcare space as well. But it's easy to forget that even if it's not a financially driven or a financial services company, there's still a potential for fraud. Gift cards is probably one thing, as one example, but online commerce and all kinds of weird stuff. So I don't know if you can maybe kind of provide us with a view of that space. Fraud, sure. What types, where it happens, because in your role looking at that stuff, what are the things that you care about most?
Yes. So fraud and risk are two terms that they mean different things in context. They mean different things in different industries. So in financial services, or in the area of financial services where I cut my teeth on this, fraud was one type of risk. Another type of risk might be credit risk. And these are in-product problems. They were not enterprise cybersecurity problems. They were product and marketing problems, which meant that oftentimes the risk team, which dealt with issues of both fraud and credit and maybe some other risks, was much more likely to sit next to marketing than to a team like security, which was traditionally focused on, working on the security perimeter of the organization and then everything inside. Now, these days, a lot of times when folks say risk, they don't mean what I think of, which is a very sort of quantitative approach to measuring potential losses in terms of dollars. They mean the risk as in the meaty middle of GRC, which is sort of a different set of practices, maybe. And sometimes when folks say fraud, they don't mean transactional fraud or kind of like a portfolio level risk exposure of fraud. They mean something like insider threat and the idea that someone would abuse their credentials inside the organization to engage in illegal behavior that would involve losses, but is not the par for the course everyday thing that you might see attempted if you are processing thousands or millions of transactions per day. So when I say risk and when I say fraud, I'm usually describing things that are related to transactions, to payments, to money movement in mass. That's usually where my head goes. But of course, I listen, when I'm amongst cybersecurity risk analysts, I can turn my head over a little more to the GRC side of things.
So you made the distinction, and for someone like me that is not into this specifics, I still see that once you go into cybersecurity, and you kind of mentioned that they magically, though, they do reconnect together. And before we started, we were asking you like fusion teams, which sounds like some special task that do this, and you said that's how you reconnect in a way the thing. So strategically speaking, how do you divide it in the team and the business, and how you reconnect it but keep it separate? It sounds like a balancing act.
Yes. So I think that they don't always connect, but they could connect. And so here are some of the places where I've seen them connect. One is that an anti-fraud team, a traditional anti-fraud team, in the way that I kind of just explained, they would not necessarily invest in threat intel. But that's actually like the beginning of the transaction lifecycle in some ways, because you could have someone's credentials be dumped somewhere and then they might be abused in the process of conducting a transaction. So a cybersecurity team would be more likely to be monitoring for that kind of thing and might be able to pull that intelligence and forward it over to a fraud detection team for them to use and incorporate into their strategies. Another place where things could connect, sort of, is the idea that both teams have this concept of detection. They're looking for anomalies, they're looking for known heuristics of bad behavior. And so it's not necessarily the same tool set because there tend to be bespoke systems hooked right into payment processing for the fraud folk. And then the security folk are looking from telemetry. I would sort of describe it as layer 7 down, while the fraud folks may be looking at things that are layer 8 and up if we had higher layers than 8. But there are sort of some interesting things that happen also in this third spot, which is where there's an online interaction with a user needs to actually, log into a system, in which case there's this idea of authentication and abuse of authentication credentials, which is a place sometimes, it is where cyber teams play when we're talking about enterprise authentication use cases. And is authentication of consumers, is consumer identity so different? So there's some expertise there that can be shared, some potential heuristics, bad lists, and things of that nature, that it's a little fluid sometimes who might be the one who is responsible for putting in the technical controls, even if, for example, it's the fraud team that would put in the detective controls here and the security team that might put the intelligence gathering tools there.
So for me, as you're talking about these things where they might connect, I'm thinking of scenarios on both sides, and I guess what I see is an application right at the front of this. Mm-hmm. And it's either a web app to do some business transaction or B2C transaction. If it's financially driven fraud teams might look for behavior related to that. If it's about trying to breach the app to gain access to other things, the security team would probably look to those activities. But in both situations, it's behavior and action and looking for bad things happening. And so in that context, it's still an application development process, right? So in some cases, it's manipulating the app to gain access. Some cases, manipulating the app to change prices, get discounts.
Yes-ish.
Yes-ish.
Yes-ish. So this is where I am excited that I feel like product security is expanding in deeper into product in places, which I think is really healthy and lovely. For a long time, app security and product security was about bugs in the code, right? There is a problem that could be exploited within the application, where with fraud, the application is working perfectly. It's working as intended. It's just that the user has bad intentions. And so they are abusing the existing, perfectly healthy design of the application. They're using it as intended, WAI, working as intended. And so that's very tricky in that you're looking for bad behavior that looks almost exactly like good behavior, which means that when you are looking for anomalies or you are looking for patterns, you're looking for behaviors, but you are looking for it's a subset within a pool of things that really are. It really is legitimate use of the app. It's just with malicious intent. Which kind of brings us a little bit to where I have seen the dividing line between security and fraud, which is a fraud team. Fraud teams are typically, they have something that they can do. If they think that a transaction is a bad transaction, they could decline the transaction in real time. They can decline it. They can put a hold on it. They could ask for a step-up level of authentication. They're in the product. They're affecting users. And that is something that not all security teams are really invited to do, which is affect the flow of money and affect user experience quite so directly. Security, of course, is value for the company and it's a value for the consumers, our customers of a platform. But when it comes down to real decisions in dollars and cents, those are product decisions, which is why the fraud teams tend to be a little bit more aligned on the product side of things. The sort of philosophical difference here too is that I'm not going to say that fraud teams have an easier problem of it, but they have a very clear feedback loop when a transaction goes badly that they can train off to great levels of precision so that you can actually make very rational decisions about what your cutoffs are going to be, how much fraud you're going to allow through versus how many good customers might be declined. And security has always had, it's not a point, like there's a process, a checkout flow, or a payment transaction. It is a flow and you can make point decisions at a point in time, where cybersecurity has always had to manage this multidimensional surface, right? And so something weird could happen anywhere at any time because any app could have a vuln in it. And that is why intrusion detection is so hairy. It happens at multiple levels of the stack and across entire organizational services, both production technology and enterprise technology. So it's just a different and almost no feedback loop at all. Like you cannot know for months, years, or ever if something did happen that was unauthorized or untoward. So it's very difficult to develop automation that works at the level of precision with which you could have a highly rational economic, financial trade-off discussion with folks about trade-offs with user experience or production quality versus the prevention of bad things happening.
Wow, I'm confused. No. Actually, you did a great job in explaining. I was more confused before, but I do see a lot of complexity here, and I'm thinking in my head, the cybersecurity team is trying to prevent things to happen. Then if all fails because the human get in a perfect machine and take advantage of it, then you get this special team where you're like, all right, now we got to get on the product, block the transaction, do something else. So this is like my movie mind working. But you work with this as an advisor with the CEOs and the CISOs, and we always know that it's a very hard job to make the connection between the business and the security and the budget. And we're getting better, but maybe some experience that you had on how better strategize these functions in the business, and how maybe the CISO role is changing. Maybe even the CEO role is changing. I don't know. I'm asking you.
Sure. I think that one of the things that I love about fraud is that the problem starts as money. So it's sort of easier to size it as money versus many problems of cybersecurity, which they're technology problems. You can see an impact, but how do you measure the potential financial impact of some of these things? Where with fraud, again, not saying that it's easier, just saying that you don't have to necessarily do that translation of things into dollars, because you're starting with dollars and ending with dollars, which has in the past for me made some budget decisions a lot easier, right? Because when you walk in and you say, I can prevent $1 billion in losses at the cost of $350,000 and 200 dev days. I mean, that would be amazing. Wouldn't that be amazing? But you can have those levels of conversation where you can say, this is the investment. We know how much the investment costs, and this is the projected loss savings. And so when you can have a conversation like that, it's an easy conversation to have with someone in finance, because it's really just a question of like, is that the right rate of return as far as our investment, versus conversations in security where you can say, well, we'll improve our maturity level by this much, or we'll reduce the risk. It'll go from high to medium. I think the closest that I have seen in like pure enterprise cybersecurity is when you're able to talk about investments you're going to make in either that's going to answer questions that potential customers have. So you'd be more likely to land some, big deals, because of course, customers now with their supply chain risk, they have expectations. That's one. And then the other example is when you're able to have a discussion that say these controls will help us reduce the cost of our cyber insurance by X. So those are the closest that you can get. However, I encourage every CISO everywhere to partner with their engineering and infra team. You can also make arguments around facilitating the speed of development or improving the reliability of infrastructure. Those are also big ticket items that you could contribute to, and you can get at some of those financial discussions, but it remains squirrely. And what I'm seeing though is while in a lot of organizations, the interests of fraud are very different than the interests of cybersecurity, although there are some touch points and maybe some common technologies, and of course, a heated interest in profiling the bad actors. I am seeing CISOs being asked to step up and broaden their remit in a couple of different ways. One is taking some responsibility for fraud and anti-abuse. I did some of that when I was at Reddit, for example, and a little bit at Electronic Arts. A couple places where I've worked, I've been asked to kind of bridge domains. And then other places, folks are asking security and CISOs to take on IT, other internal services, technology services. And in some places, I do see security making inroads or connecting with infra or engineering. And so there's this interesting kind of, where does it make sense to broaden the CISO's role? Because the CISO within technology is the primary risk executive. So what other risks or what other services are CISOs being asked to take on? It varies widely as far as the maturity of the company and also kind of the interest and background of the CISOs themselves. But it is interesting to see how the term CISO now means many different things in many different places.
Oh boy, so many questions. Let me go with this one. So the fraud team, it starts and ends with money. So starts and finishes easy. The middle part is kind of what I want to talk to you about, because for security, we don't have the money measurement. So we're looking at things like MTTx, all the times to do stuff. And then we get caught up in the, well, how many times are we doing those things? Which just says we're really busy and maybe we're shaving seconds off of minutes or even hours. I'm wondering, are there any lessons from the fraud team in their chewy middle bits, though? If we don't have the money part to hang on either end, and all we have is what I call the middle with no ends, the MTT stuff, are there things that the fraud team does in the middle for measurements and communicating, or is it just the money? Or because I'm thinking there has to be stuff that they're doing to know that their teams are actually doing it the best way possible, and if they can tune these dials, they might save 10% more in loss. So I don't know. What about the middle bits? Are there things that security teams can benefit from?
Well, I like that question. I think that one of the things that I really appreciated from fraud was their testing methodologies. The idea of sampling in order to kind of understand how big a problem is. So the way that these fraud models work, or the training of the fraud models work, is you have all of this backend data that you've collected, on all the transactions that went right and went wrong. And then you use magic, ML and AI and statistics and all of those things to kind of understand, well, what are the factors that, the risk factors that we really need to look at. But then you test that. You sort of test that against forward-looking data you're not sure about yet, and you sample, and you may try your risk models in production with resources, looking at the results and kind of assessing, doing things by hand in order to make sure that you have confidence in what you've built. But ultimately, this idea of measuring your detection capabilities and just constantly testing it, I feel like is almost like a combination of like red teaming and our own detection capabilities in cyber. In a lot of cases, we just kind of trust what comes out of the tool. Like something blinks, so we go look at it. But how can we test it more rigorously? And I do see some startups maybe trying to solve that problem, and teams that have the time and resources kind of investing in it. SOAR and some of the things around automating playbooks, I think, is a really great step in that direction. But I guess what I would say is, while fraud models are very powerful, and one of the things that makes them so powerful is how much confidence the teams can have in them, it's from the fact that they've really, really tested rigorously. And so there's two lessons in there. One is about the testing of our own stuff and how we might do that. The other is the idea that you can get a sense of how performance is going via sampling, which we don't do quite as much. I suspect that's because we have so much data. And like I said, it's a surface area. It's not just a type of transaction that you can like look at one thing at one point in time and really come to solid conclusions about it. But I think the sampling might help us get better confidence in our own metrics and measurements.
I can't get out of my head the idea that there are, you said the fraud team is in the app, right? And maybe it's multiple systems and apps that create this business process, but they're inside that. And we don't have that luxury in cybersecurity at the moment.
we don't have that luxury. We also don't have that accountability.
Right.
But
So my question is, do
what
you
mean.
foresee a future where we have the data, but we can analyze the data in a way where we have confidence as a security ops team, SecOps team, to say this activity, I'm not going to block everybody, but I want to block this and ask for this step. I mean, I know it exists in some places, but do you think we'll get to a point where it's widespread and we actually have the responsibility and the opportunity to be more like the fraud team in that regard?
Right. I think that there's a natural place for the fraud team to sort of sit in the back end of a front end experience. If you sort of think in your head as a consumer when you're going through the checkout flow, you log into let's say it's an e-commerce website, you log into the site, you already have a basket, you click checkout, it asks you to fill in shipping address, maybe reconfirm your financial details. Let's assume you'd never entered them before. Like there's all of these sort of steps. And then there's you press submit and the order is submitted. So all along that chain, there can be things that a fraud team is looking at, because ultimately that last clicking submit, having the transaction go through, that's the thing where value moves, money moves. And so it's a natural place for them to sit and make a decision of some kind. Hold the transaction, decline the transaction, ask for more information, get them on the phone, whatever that is. With security, I think that the most likely place for us to start having some of those discussions where we would live on the app or around the app would be at login, because it's an authentication. That's our sweet spot. We know authentication, and authentication is that first step from the wild internet into our application, into our business. That said, it's the most dangerous place to play, because if you have blocked a good customer, they have no they can't get in. So it can create a really terrible user experience. So the most natural point is also the riskiest point. And so I do though see places where fusion is being considered, consumer identity, because it's authentication, and that's something that security folk know. And because it is that first step in from the wild outside to the, clear and coherent inside of our businesses, that is where security is being invited to play.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Interesting. I'm picturing, if you can put a layer between and subnet and keep things separate, then you don't have the single one place. You have multiple places to control.
Right.
But anyway,
And
I digress.
a place where, I think wanting to be directly in the application, I just don't think most security teams have the product and engineering resources that they would really want to get there. But a place where fusion is really effective is, let's say there is a fraud ring or a botnet that is particularly pernicious. Fraud teams, because they're focused on making these very precise decisions at this single point, they are happy to take as input intelligence that has been called by a smart threat intel team and figure out how to incorporate that into the decision that they make. They can work through some of the false positive issues and things like that. It's very valuable data. It's very valuable collaboration. It doesn't require that security kind of take ownership within the product. But I tend to focus on retail and payment and financial services. Where I would really love to see cyber teams connect with fraud teams, where they are sort of, I'm not going to say both weak, but where they could both really use each other's help, is in things like API abuse. Not necessarily payment specific, because then it's this like weird, it's an abuse of the app, but it could be an attack on the API. And how do you tell authorized behavior from unauthorized behavior? So that's where I think, besides payment flows, collaboration would be fantastic.
That makes complete sense to me.
Yeah, I'm talking about collaboration. Collaborate with us for a second. We're not in Vegas, and you are. So we want to know. We're curious, like, how's Black Hat going over there? We know you were there for a CISO summit. We know you can't tell much about it, but kind of like let's close with your experience at Black Hat so far.
Sure. So I'm hearing great things from B-Sides. I was at the CISO summit yesterday, which was fantastic. That lineup is on the website. It's Chatham House rules, but all of the presenters did a great job. Lots of good information shared. And then I was just on the show floor a few minutes ago. The expo hall is packed. There are so many people here, and I think that it feels like Black Hat. So it's been a couple of years where things have been a little funky, and I just feel like everyone is so excited to see each other. I've talked to a lot of great startups who are working on things they're really excited about, and a lot of information exchange and telling of tales. So it's good so far. I'm sorry that you're not here.
Yeah, we have a little bit of fear of missing out, but at the same time, I think we contributed quite a bit with a lot of conversation before the event. So our job was actually to have people come and see the speakers, the one open to the public, of course. And
Right.
So we're doing our thing. But yes, of course, we miss to see a lot of good friends over there, but probably next year we'll be back. In the meantime, I want to thank you for this conversation with us. And I want to thank everybody who's been listening so far with all the conversation we had. I believe, Sean, we still have one more to go probably after the event. At least one more.
I know we have Diana Initiative coming.
Oh, yeah.
I think there may be one more as well.
Yeah.
Beyond that, so lots of chats to and from Vegas occurred here.
Awesome.
Or virtually from Vegas. So Allison, thank you so much. And for everybody that's been listening, we hope you enjoyed this conversation as well as the other one. And you can go on itspmagazine.com to check out all the conversation and everything that is happening in Las Vegas at Black Hat. So thank you so much.